same thing. If you're going to choose somebody to partner with to do FSA and HSA acceptance, find somebody that has compliance as a moat.
Welcome to another episode of the Payment Strategy Show. I'm Aaron Steinberg, VP of Revenue at Rainforest. We help software platforms embed payment processing into their core product to grow revenue and improve customer retention. Super excited today. I'm here with Chris Shaw, Head of Go-to-Market Partnerships at Truemed. Truemed's a healthcare payments and eligibility platform that enables health and wellness brands to accept HSA and FSA funds by integrating compliance and clinical eligibility workflows at checkout. Super excited, Chris. You guys have been on a tear recently. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aaron. Really excited to chat today.
Absolutely. So I guess really before we get started in questions and things along those lines and getting into the nitty gritty, maybe tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into payments?
Yeah, so those are two separate questions, and long and winding, right? As I think a lot of people that end up in payments, right? we sort of end up here by accident almost. So my journey into payments started, let's call it 30 years ago, right? Like I was a kid that was entrepreneurial and I got very involved in like eBay, right? So pre-PayPal, eBay, creating websites, helping people sell things, buying things, trying to find arbitrages. And I was just always fascinated with, the idea of trading goods and services over the web. And I think that kind of carried me all the way through, right? Like more recently, I've been at places like Hallmark where I was a director of e-commerce and, worked on the payment side of, B2B and direct to consumer. Then I was at Shopify, which is like the quintessential vertical SaaS company that everybody kind of thinks of right now, right? Where I would argue Shopify is a payments company first and, kind of loss leads retail software later. And then most recently I was at Nuvei where I was head of platform partnerships. So I've been, a merchant, a vertical SaaS company, and a payment processor independently over the last, 15 years here. So kind of like every piece of the stack.
Really the trifecta there. Get a perception across the board, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess like to kick it off, for our listeners who may not be familiar, can you explain what HSA and FSA cards are? How are they different from traditional credit and debit cards? Why vertical software platforms, specifically those in healthcare, medical, or wellness, should care about accepting them as well?
Yeah. So HSA, FSA accounts are really interesting, right? So if you think through like the legal policy framework that established them, right? The idea was we want to incentivize pre-tax dollars for investment in folks' health. Right. So if you think about the way like health insurance was really created in the United States and really has been administered for generations now, right? It's done at the employer level, at the group level, and then, before tax dollars. So the ideas with flexible spending accounts, FSAs, and health savings accounts, HSAs, was that let's provide an investment vehicle in which consumers can take pre-tax dollars and then usher them toward myriad purposes, right? So for most people, they think of like, I go into Walgreens, I buy some Band-Aids, I get my monthly prescription, and those would be included as like, pre-approved eligible items, right? Those are like in a big master feed. They're communicated clearly as always eligible. Then you have dual eligibility items, right? That's where Truemed really comes in, right? We provide sort of the services and the scaffolding over which a consumer can look at something that isn't traditionally pre-approved and get a letter of medical necessity or essentially a doctor consultation to buy that with pre-tax dollars. But the basics of FSA and HSA are they are administered by groups and then they are put on the Visa MasterCard rails, just like a regular credit card, right? They're debit cards. You have to have funds in the accounts before you can actually use the funds. Every administrator is a little different. Every card network's a little different, but that's the gist of it, right? The gist of it is a flexible spending account is something that I can use in that plan year for the purposes that are outlined in the plan. A health savings account is triple tax advantage. The idea is I can put pre-tax dollars in there. They accrue pre-tax without any taxation. And then you can actually, take them out after you reach retirement age for any medical purpose without taxation as well.
It seems like every time I talk about HSA, someone's asking me, well, do you have any idea if I should keep those funds in there till I retire, if I should use them for actual healthcare? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a financial advisor, but I can tell you it feels like it's using free money when you use it for healthcare, even though it's not. Some people like it that way. I don't know, in my experience, at least.
Yeah. I mean, that line I think is exactly right, Aaron. Like, we're not financial advisors. Like we would tell everybody, like, think through how you want to use those funds, how you want to deploy those funds. I can tell you, like with my family, I've used them in every way possible, right? I've been on high deductible plans where, we're having a great year and I want to sock away as much money as possible, knowing that I'm going to have healthcare costs later. I've done flexible spending accounts or FSA dollars for dependent care, right? I have an 8-year-old who's in day camps. My 13-year-old, she doesn't really qualify anymore, but the 8-year-old, she's in day camps, and we do that over the summer. And then, limited purpose funds or just, that flexible account you get that year, that's the big difference. In FSA, you have to extinguish, based on the plan details, usually in that plan year. HSAs can carry, until you spend them, down in retirement. But like everybody has a different reason. We've seen people use them for really straightforward purposes. We've seen people use them for pretty elaborate purposes, right? Yeah, there's all sorts of justifications that somebody can have for using those dollars. It's really an independent decision. The thing that we want to enable is choice, but we also want to do it in like an evidence-backed way, right? So if you look at Truemed, like we really think of ourselves as a healthcare company first, and payments is our mechanism for which we provide those healthcare recommendations and guides, right? So like if you look at, the limited purpose with food or sauna or massage or gym memberships, right? All of those things are based on that individual person's needs and their individual consult with us in the telehealth consult, right? So they're describing their conditions, they're describing the things that are bothering them, things they aspire to do better, the weight they want to lose, like whatever their justification may be, but they're getting an individualized approach and then applying it to a treatment or a product or a service that they want to use it for.
Yeah, it's super interesting. On the surface, it seems easy, right? Like you check if you have money in your account and then you swipe a Visa card that pulls out of your FSA or HSA account. But, the more you're talking through this, seems like there's just a ton of nuance. And, I know there's different models for HSA and FSA acceptance overall. Like curious sort of how you guys view the technical requirements for each to make sure that everything is flowing, correctly. And I guess how should platforms decide which method to use?
Yeah. And candidly, I think that's the biggest moat and the thing that I've learned most since I've been here, right, is that really Truemed is a compliance service. We're compliance as a service for TPA administrators, for groups, for the cards themselves, and then for the consumer and the merchant, right? So if you think about it, right, like we have this big matrix of the rules and regulations from the IRS, the rules and regulations from the TPA administrators and the card networks that prescribe these are the types of purposes that these funds can be used for. And then we want to verify that those funds are being used in that way, right? And from our perspective, the service we provide to merchants is we look at their SKU count and their services and their products, and we say, look, based on the available data, these types of patients, these types of consumers can purchase and use these types of products and services, right? So it's this, gigantic algorithm, I guess we've built over time that includes, benefits across all these different sources, and then that compliance mechanism to show the benefits administrator that somebody's using the services in a reliable, evidence-backed way, right? I think there are people that are rushing out there to be like, hey, I can swipe a card and use the funds and they're free, right? Obviously, they're not free. You're paying for it. You're just doing it in a tax advantage way, and you're doing it with a specific purpose in mind. What I can say that is really awesome is that when consumers are able to use these investment vehicles for these purposes, they usually spend more, right? So if they are looking at a specific treatment, they might be able to do more of that treatment. If they're looking at a specific product, maybe they can upgrade to the larger model, Peloton or something, whatever purpose they're driving toward, they're able to use more money and think about it in a much more profound way than just trying to find the cheapest thing possible.
Yeah. It's almost like the BNPL effect of healthcare in a way.
A little bit, yes. I mean, I do think one of the things that we're really providing to people is I don't have to put this off. Yeah. Right. So if I think about the healthcare spend and sort of the age difference, right? Like I'm in my 40s, right? I'm thinking about, maintaining a healthy weight. I'm thinking about making sure my metabolic activity is where I want it to be and exercise is where I want it to be. When I was younger, I wasn't thinking about investing in my health the same way, but I had a gym membership. Yeah. Right. So people on the sort of lower end of the curve, they can get used to spending these dollars in profound ways that add up to meaningful health outcomes later. And people in my shoes that are, getting more doctor recommendations and treatment recommendations, and we're waking up with more aches and pains, like, we can come at it with a different approach and spend those dollars differently.
Absolutely. You mentioned the obvious ones like healthcare, right? Of course. But then you also mentioned some, maybe less traditional industries where maybe people don't think about HSA and FSA usage. Are there any sort of surprise verticals when you came on to Truemed that you're like, oh, I didn't realize we could get a letter of medical necessity for this one, or I never thought about using HSA for that type of product, anything like that?
Well, I want to qualify a little bit, right? Because I think anything that, a Truemed purchaser is buying in some way, shape, or form has a health benefit to it, right? Like it has an evidence-backed benefit. Now, what I'll tell you is that I think people are sometimes surprised to learn that like a proper bed is a health benefit, right? Right? Like if you are somebody who is struggling with insomnia or struggling with, sleep apnea, investing in a really high quality bed is a perfect explanation, right? Sauna is something that I think a lot of people look at and they think, well, that's something like, wealthy people do at the gym. But the truth is it's one of the best evidence-backed ways we have of preventing atherosclerosis and making sure that people have access to, metabolic health, right? Like if you look at sauna usage, it's right up there with exercise. Like it actually tests out much better than a lot of the drugs that, you could be put on, right? And these are all things that like can be caveated. They're benefits to specific populations and specific methodologies. And I think that's the coolest thing is being able to see of the, million plus people that have done a Truemed transaction, right? Like these folks have, done it in a way that's benefiting them in their lifestyle and in consultation with their health needs, and not just like a random thing they were pushed to buy from a generic meta ad or something.
Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of that these days to use instead. But it's pretty awesome to know that you're helping people with every transaction. It's a pretty cool mission.
Yeah, we're a very mission-driven company, right? From the top down, from Justin, our CEO, to everybody in the company. We have lots of former athletes, lots of people that have been affected personally in extended family due to health outcomes and in health traumas, I guess. So like it's definitely a mission-driven company in that regard.
It's awesome. From my point of view, obviously being on the payment side, of course, I'm familiar with the fact that not every payment processor can handle HSA and FSA cards. So curious your advice when you talk to customers or platforms or brands out there currently sort of looking at their payment provider to see if they can support those. What advice do you give them? How do you help them look for, a specialized solution if they need one, or just something different right off the shelf?
Well, I mean, starting with Rainforest is a great spot, right? Like you guys have a lot of folks in the healthcare space, and obviously you understand VSaaS really well. So, right, depending on where they're at in the stack, like really get to understanding like the rules and regs around it, right? So like if you're a merchant and you're a med spa or you're a massage therapist or you're doing personal training, right? Understand which applications are like pre-approved automatic, right? And there are vertical SaaS platforms out there that say, hey, here's the MCC code, show us and prove us in the KYC stage that you're that type of merchant, and you can just automatically accept those payments. In our case, because of the work we do to provide that dual eligibility in that letter of medical necessity that I mentioned prior, right? Like, I think you have to find the right partner and the right integration to make that process really easy, right? Like, it is complicated to know the TPA's needs, write the letter in a way that the TPA needs it, prove it at the transaction level, and making sure at the reconciliation level that that entire transaction is compliant all the way through. And like, that's what we're specialized in doing, right? For the VSaaS providers in between, like your merchants, right? Or your clients, right? Like, I think understanding where they fit and understanding that, do they have pre-approved? Do they have dual eligibility? And like when and where to enable those merchants to make those decisions, right? I think one of the things that's really cool about Rainforest and your VSaaS companies is you guys are so dedicated to making a really awesome merchant experience, right? So like when I was living that life at Hallmark, there were some providers that were just like super clear to us that they were trying to make our lives easier. And I feel like that's a lot of your customers. And, you want to be asking those questions. Okay, I'm opening these payment rails. There's $150 billion in HSA and FSA funds that I'm making available to my merchants. How do I make it really clear to communicate it? How to make it really easy for customers to understand so those customers aren't getting upset because they can't use the funds that way? Or how do they make it really clear that if it's a recurring subscription that they can add their card in and they won't be hitting insufficient funds because the funds are only coming out at certain intervals, right? It's all those like little things to just make it really, really simple for the person to make the transaction and walk away from it and just think, wow, that was awesome, right? Like, we have a really high net promoter score with our merchants and our customers. And I know all of your VSaaS clients are trying to do the same thing, right? They're trying to be super important in that, merchant of record, system of record for their merchants. Like, think through those implications when you're choosing a partner.
I think that's awesome advice. And, what's interesting is, one of the reasons we exist is, not every one of our customers is a payments business first, right? Not everybody is Shopify, to your point earlier. So when you look at things like regulation and the regulatory aspects of taking payments or becoming your own payment processor, of compliance as well, becomes really, really challenging. And you're like, why would I do this? Why don't I just continue building a great SaaS platform? Like you said, be really hands-on and make the lives easier of our customers, and then offload the payments to Rainforest. And I find that you're probably in a similar situation, to an extent for a lot of your customers as well. And I'm curious, sort of, what compliance considerations should platforms be aware of when they're processing HSA and FSA payments that you guys have learned either through many years or the hard way?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, you have to look at those letters of medical necessity, right? So one of the things that we really hang our hat on is that if you go through the telehealth consultation, you're doing the interrogatory and you've got this letter, does that letter look like it was written by a doctor and advised by a doctor? That I think can tell you a lot, right? So if you are trying to sell a good, understanding for what medical purpose you're trying to sell that good, and then for what justification that letter was actually written for, right? So you can go out there and we kind of joke about it, right? But the colloquial thing has always been somebody trying to sell you snake oil. Right? If you go out there and see letters of medical necessity that are justifying really absurd outcomes, and whether that's a product like snake oil or for a condition that doesn't seem to make sense, right? It's purely purely aesthetic. That really isn't medical in the same way that TPAs want to see. The benefits administrators want to see things that are actually treating medical conditions, and just asking those basic questions like you would in a doctor's office, right? Is there medical proof that this thing you're prescribing me or recommending me to purchase is actually going to do me good? I want to know that, right? And at Truemed, we do a fantastic job of looking at all of the research, making those recommendations and constantly updating it. I mean, one of the things that I found really awesome is that our providers and the providers in the network that use Truemed, they'll look at our letters and be like, wow, I'm learning things about the recommendations you guys are making because they are tried and true up-to-date science, right? If you're a doctor in the United States right now, there's so much science published every day, and it's across so many different vectors and so many different disciplines that you couldn't possibly keep up with it, right? Our job is to take all of that and make providers' jobs easier, but also make it really easy for the consumer to take, treatments and recommendations from their PCP alongside us and win together, right?
Especially if it's not that hard to get started, right? And enable it through a third party, right? So curious, what do you typically see sort of the implementation process for those that want to start accepting HSA or FSA payments?
Yeah. So in our case, the implementation is pretty straightforward, right? So you can find us a lot of obvious places. You go the Shopify app store, right? We're there. We do API integrations. We're in the process of working with several different processors, right? We want to make it really simple for a merchant to not interrupt their flow of business, right? So in the simplest case, Truemed will actually act as the merchant of record, right? We'll come in and we will accept the HSA FSA charge and we'll remit it to the end merchant and we'll just warrant that purchase. But we're doing that alongside the merchant, right? We're looking at the goods, we're understanding the delivery statuses and those kinds of things, and we're understanding the medical need because of the LMNs. But in terms of getting us started, it's usually very quick, right? The thing we need to do is we need to look at your products and services, right? Mm-hmm. We need to do a categorization of those products and services to understand what kinds of conditions they treat, what sort of evidence-based science is behind those things. And then it's setting up the interrogatories, the questionnaire to, usher somebody through the actual consultation of, I have this condition, this is what I want to treat, is this item eligible? And then taking the payment. Taking the payment itself is pretty easy, right? It's very similar to if you added buy now, pay later, or, some other sort of alternate payment method, right? So you guys work with dozens, if not hundreds of alternate payment methods all over the world, right? We fit into that category, right? We're simple as turning it on as APM, but we provide the peace of mind of that compliance engine for all the healthcare needs, the benefits administrator needs, and then the card network rules and regulations around, what, Visa and MasterCard say you can do with these funds.
Yep. Absolutely. It's nice to not do that much work and have it fully integrated and feel like just such a seamless process.
Well, I mean, it's taken a lot of work. I'm a relatively new employee, right? I'm 3 months into this, and thankfully right. I'm living off the backs of the dozens of people that have been doing this work for a few years now.
Yeah. But on a merchant side, nice and easy.
Yeah. For the merchant, I mean, I can't imagine conceptually trying to do this 3 years ago. It was just impossible, right? On a merchant by merchant basis, the only way you could have really done it would have been for your end customer to have their own in-person consultation and then have a doctor who's unfamiliar with the science and unfamiliar with the law to then give them a letter of medical necessity that necessitates it, right? Because it's not like you can just say, like, this doctor says you should lose weight, get a treadmill, right? It's ICD codes and, TPA benefit administration codes and all sorts of information that has to go along those rails. So it's not payment network rails. It's compliance and IRS and benefits administrator rails that are the complicated piece. For merchants, it's easy now.
It's good to know. And I'll be honest, I think for a lot of the listeners here, they're going to be surprised to hear that you've only been there for 3 months here. You sound like a veteran. So kudos. You're learning quick.
Lots of people to learn from. And, like lots of experience on the merchant side and SaaS side, you just sort of learn. But in this case, right, the benefit to your vertical SaaS customers or like payment professionals is, we're opening up funds that are tax-free, right? So when a consumer goes to purchase your good or your service, right, they're not having to budget from their regular budget. They're looking at this and saying, I have this pot of money from a prior job. I have this savings that I've dedicated to, the health of my family this year. And they're able to make, strategic purchases, larger purchases more easily. And, what we've seen is it leads to increased purchase volume of 30% on a sale. So, for these folks that are allowing for HSA and FSA purchases, right? If they're in a fitness environment, they're doing more studio bookings. They're adding personal training. They're adding a massage therapy while they're on site. If they're buying a treadmill, they're buying the extra pedals and they're buying the mat that goes with the treadmill. If they're buying a bed, they're buying a nicer bed because they can afford to do so because they've got access to funds they didn't have before. So like, it's a benefit all around. It's a benefit for the merchants. It's a benefit for the consumers. And we've just seen tremendous growth based off this model.
Yeah, Chris, what I think is interesting to me is that, customers rely so much on these funds and this style of payments and what it provides them that, from what I gather, they're actually starting in the Truemed marketplace for searching for things that they need, whether goods or services, rather than just having to select it at checkout when they already knew they were going to, purchase something. Is that accurate? And, help me understand sort of what you see as trends there.
Yeah, it's changed quite dramatically, I think. I think originally when people kind of came across Truemed, the idea was, I'm looking at a product detail page or I'm at a checkout of a merchant and maybe I want access to these funds and I've never heard of Truemed. What we've actually started to see is people know of Truemed. They associate us with HSA and FSA funds. They've seen the letters of medical necessity that we provide and sort of our brand value there. But also our merchants have decided, wow, like I see the data. These people that come in through Truemed and spend their FSA, HSA dollars, they are high intent purchasers. They purchase more, conversion percentage is much higher than the regular consumer. So what happens is we end up building this really great muscle around, pulling in the merchandise that these folks sell in their own websites into our own marketplace, such that everybody can see all of these eligible items or potentially eligible items since it's on a case by case basis. And then also like they're able to go through and make that really seamless transition. Like I've done this before. I understand it. It's really easy to go through. But we do these co-marketing campaigns that are just going by gangbusters, right? Like my exposure to Truemed before I ended up joining the company was a TikTok ad for a Peloton that was Peloton X Truemed, use your FSA, HSA dollars. And it was like during the fourth quarter rush. And it was like, wow, this makes like a lot of sense if somebody has an FSA that's getting ready to expire and how they can deploy those funds. So yeah, I mean, we have really worked hard to educate our e-commerce customers and our, fitness studio partners, service providers on just like how important this mechanism is, but also how to communicate it to their customers, right? Like explaining the LMN process, explain the delay or the reimbursement process if it works that way, right? We just have built a lot of muscle around it and try to communicate it clearly. And I think that's really what's happened is we've been rewarded because we've been so transparent with consumers and made it really easy to purchase with these funds that they come back, right? And they think of our name and brand and it's become sort of this, we're just associated outright with the FSA, HSA space.
Love that. Super, super cool. I guess like that kind of brings me to another question, which is, outside of merchants from, our community, vertical SaaS, in general, looking ahead, do you see any, trends that you think would be interesting to those that they should maybe get ahead of?
Yeah. I mean, I think like the trend line is that these funds are becoming larger and more durable, right? So I think what's happening now is people get into, 10 years into the Affordable Care Act plus in like a lot of changes in insurance innovation, right? Employers are incentivizing the groups to be healthier up front. Plan administration is getting really expensive. So they're saying, we want to do more high deductible plans and we want to sponsor these types of vehicles originally, right? So like these used to kind of be like opt in. Now they're more opt out, right? A lot of people are signing up for employment plans and they're getting into that employer and they're automatically being granted $500 or $1,000 from their employer for these FSA and HSA vehicles. So like the TAM for this is getting bigger and bigger. So like it used to be like a nice to have. I think it's going to become more of a requirement, right? It's going to be more of like, wow, if I sell anything remotely in the healthcare wellness space that could qualify for these kinds of funds and I'm not making it eligible, that I'm really behind the curve, right? It used to be you're an early adopter. Now it's like, you really need to be on board. I think the other thing that's going to transition over time is people will get more holistic with the use of these funds, right? So like one thing we've seen already is, we enable customers like Function, right? That sell testing and, real, science-backed, recommendations and conclusions along with that testing, right? So like we're starting to see people use these funds in collaborative ways. Say, I'm going to go get a prescription medication and I'm going to do a treatment and I'm going to go to a fitness studio and I want all of this managed within the same sort of budget line that I have for FSA, HSA, right? So I think if you work in arguably any of these spaces, you're thinking about how do I position myself to be in that space? How do I position myself to be really easily accessible for those consumers? And then the other trend line I see is like things beyond everyday items, right? So like if we think about like whole home filtration systems for people that have allergies, right? So like you guys sell to lots of people that do like field service. So if there are lots of people in the world, or in the country doing field service installations, home improvements, things like that, like a lot of those things are arguably could be, letter medical necessity qualified, right? Water filtration systems, right? Like those kinds of things that kind of get beyond in services, like things that people are doing and having done to their houses or workplaces that make them healthier, right? Like those things are all things that we're looking out toward. I think, we've had a lot of conversation internally about like, peptides and GLP-1s and the consumerization of a lot of things that 10 years ago, 20 years ago were purely pharmaceutical, right? And I think as that market gets larger, and especially as like millennials who have kind of grown up with the internet, get much more enabled to do this purchasing and this wellness management on their own, adding telehealth into their primary care provider, into their cardiologist like me, all of those different plans, I think is going to have a pretty profound impact on payments and vertical SaaS at large.
That's super interesting. I really have never thought about the field service vertical as one that actually makes a lot of sense in certain disciplines within it. That's a pretty cool way to think about it. So you talk a lot of knowledge today in general. I guess, if there was one thing that you could tell a vertical SaaS founder, for example, that they should do or know prior to enabling HSA and FSA payments, what would that be?
I mean, I think for the same reason they choose a Rainforest, right? They choose Rainforest because they know you're trying to make their ability to focus on their customer paramount. Same thing. If you're going to choose somebody to partner with to do FSA and HSA acceptance, find somebody that has compliance as a moat, right? So Truemed, we have just as many people working on the compliance side of the house as we do the go-to-market side of the house, right? Like, I think there's a lot of, rush to try to make money, right? Like we're in it for the long haul. We're doing evidence-based science on everything we do. And we are deeply committed to the providers, the group networks, and all those folks involved. So, I mean, my basic recommendation would be pay attention, see where the tea leaves are going, and really make sure that you have access to those funds. If your vertical SaaS provides a software service or a product, to those communities, like be aware of it, but also then make sure that you're working with a partner that can make your life easy. Right. The whole point of this is to make that accessibility for the end customer of the VSaaS provider. Right. If you have to be asking questions about whether my medicals and medical necessity are going to end up in denials, or, people are going to have customer service issues, or people are going to have to go through reimbursements, right? Then you're in the business of like trying to administer group health benefits, which I don't think anybody really wants to do, right? Like, I don't know that the people that work in those environments really want to do that every day, right? I kid. Like, we work with TPAs, they're amazing people. We work with benefits groups, they're awesome, right? But like, it's such a specialized segment of the population. You would never, as a vertical SaaS company, want to be like, man, I really want to know the IRS rules and regs and card network rules and regs around FSA and HSAs, right? No, you want a group that can make the technology and the compliance measures and everything that goes with that fade away and make it really easy for a customer to understand when it's eligible and how I can use my funds.
Makes a lot of sense. My dad ran an employee benefits group for his whole career, and I'm out here slinging payments instead. So I get it.
I'm glad there are people out there like your dad, right? I would not want to be in that business, but I'm super grateful for the people that are.
It does the job, right? I guess you're doing what you need to do. Well, awesome. I don't have too much here. I guess, before we wrap this up, what have I not asked, or anything you want to sort of leave the listeners with, that you think is sort of paramount to this conversation?
The thing I really like about payments is I feel like it's just innovation across every aspect of our life, right? And I think any of your listeners, if you guys think of interesting ways or applications that Truemed and FSAs and HSAs out there can benefit your customers or your merchants, let us know, right? We've got some really fascinating conversations taking place with companies big and small right now on ways that we can help folks deploy these funds. And we're always listening for the next thing, but also just, thank you for all the services that people provide, right? Our lives are so different than they were 20 or 30 years ago. I was kind of joking about being a kid on eBay, buying and selling and stuff, right? But so much of the way we consume software and services and, schedule things and run our kids' lives come through the vertical SaaSes that we're using and the payment professionals that are out there building these experiences, right? So, thank you to those folks. I'm excited to see everybody at Vertex next week. Yeah, so that's it.
Awesome, Chris. Well, we're excited to have you at Vertex. Excited to see everybody else listening as well. For those that have questions, reach out to Chris. Truemed's doing awesome stuff, and appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you.